Viv Cowley. My company's called V Moto. We're up in Oxford. This is my ABC B Aero Engine Special. So, 1990, I acquired this engine. I swapped it for a £25 pillar drill, and I've basically dragged it around with me for the last years, wondering what to do with it. It always, in my mind, had to be in a motorcycle. It's actually an auxiliary power unit from an aircraft called a Blackburn Beverley, and its role was to run a generator within the airframe when the main engines weren't running. So it's 736cc, it's rated at 19 horsepower, so it's never going to be anything that set the world on fire, but it's just such a beautiful thing. It was made approximately 1948. There were only ever 80 units ever made by a company called ABC, who used to make motorcycles up to the late 20s. So I started the project in January of this year, a tight schedule to build a bike for the show in May, but it all started gathering pace in about April, and we got it done for May, and it went to Tobacco Dock and was well received. Because the engine was going to be such a main part of it, and also it is quite large, I set the engine up on a flat aluminium table on adjustable legs and gave it a ground clearance of what I thought would be adequate. It really was as simple as that. The main consideration for me was the driveline, a gearbox, a clutch. Because the engine rotates this way, there were only two options open to me from a driveline gearbox point of view: BMW, Motor Guzzi. I own an R75.5. So I took the gearbox down, took it apart and started cutting it up. The driveline is pretty much the same. What I have had to do, again, with regards to the overall wheelbase, is shorten the drive shaft. I've shortened the drive shaft by about 60mm, just to get it all bunched up tight on the back of the box, so that it doesn't look too long. In amongst my R75.5 parts, I had a pair of rebuilt wheels. So what you see on this bike are the wheels out of that bike, the donor. So starting at the front, the forks, because again, when it was in my mind's eye and I did in effect a fag packet sketch, I didn't want to have to make the engine look any different than as it stood. The patina on the engine was fantastic. It came out of an airframe in the late 50s, and I didn't want to have to take it apart and make it all shiny or glossy. And to be fair, I thought it was such the heart of the bike, I had to maintain that patina. So immediately put it into the 40s. By virtue of that, when the engine was made. Never built any, but I had a hankering toward flat tank bikes because of the look, the whole look about a flat tanker. So based on that dictated it would have to have a set of girders in the front of it. Now those forks were from a 1929 BSA. Needless to say, they'd long worked, so it was quite an affair to get them all apart in the first instance, and then rebush them, make new spindles, and make them work as they were designed to do so. It was quite a tight squeeze getting that front wheel in there, because motorcycles of that era had wheels of about 2 inches wide. This is just about double that, especially with the fatter section tyre that I chose to get that chunky look. The mudguard started life as just a plain blade, and I've made the stays, and the rear stay doubles up as a stand. You undo that and the stand flips down, holds the front wheel in the air. A nice detail. The headlamp, that was a £40 special off of eBay. It's off of a vintage car of some description, and bears the mark of Lucas. Suits the bike quite well, I think. The handlebars I made myself, as I did with the levers. The twist grip, I believe, is Sunbeam, pre-wall Sunbeam. The fuel tanks, well, I referred back to my fag packet sketch, and I made some wooden blocks, formed the aluminium tanks. They're separate tanks, they're linked. Caps, because they're alley tanks, it was easier for me to do screw-on caps as opposed to the traditional tank cap of that time. I had a little quandary one evening when I put the tanks on. How am I going to hold them together? So just here, is a section of my leather belt that I was wearing that night. So I'm now about down, but it's well weathered and suits the part. The seat, well, the seat had to be a bit larger than normal to keep that sense of proportion. I looked at terrace seats of the period, and all the repro ones are way too short. So I just set to and made a new seat. Made it in the same fashion, all the springs are available. Made that, and then I had a friend of mine covering it, and he dressed it down to, again, drag it down to make it look a bit more period. On that note, the paintwork, when this bike was finally got around to being painted, I had to dream up a logo. Well, because the largest part of the bike is the engine, and the engine was made by this company called ABC, I trolled through the internet and found their emblem. The guys who painted the tank, it's all hand pinstriped, and the stenciling for the badge is all hand done. Funny story in so much as the people that painted this, I mentioned earlier my background's motorsport, the people that painted this paint the Williams Formula 1 car, and they made a lovely job of painting this. It was absolutely pristine, like a new pin. I didn't have the heart to tell the guy what I was about to do with it. So I went to see a friend of mine who runs vintage cars, in particular Edwardian aero engine cars, who is renowned for his skills in patination. And we then spent a week, well, he spent the majority of the time because I was busy doing other parts of the bike. He's basically dented it, scratched it, rubbed it down, rubbed oil into it, and made it look like you see it now. Not a 3-month-old paint job, more like a 30-year-old paint job, which has the desired effect. The guards, again, I bought them as steel blades and then had to modify them to suit the application. I made stuff like all the number plate holder, the stays, any fabrication that I could do, I did, because the object of the build was to kind of showcase what I can do. The exhausts, for instance, they're quite small bore and they're stainless. Well, the easiest way for me to obtain the bends was I bought 2 BMW K100 sets of front pipes, because they're 25mm in diameter and they've got nice tight bends. So I proceeded to chop them up, made the flanges that go onto the head, and then made all the pipes. These sections of the pipe are BMW, and the silencers are repro silencers of a 1950s model BMW. But I thought the fishtail look, I had to try and get that fishtail look, and that's how I arrived at that. All the boxes, this is the electrical box, and there's an oil tank over here. The electrical system, again, in the period would have been really rudimentary, nothing at all. There's not a speedo on the bike. Bikes of the 30s, speedo was an optional extra. And to be quite frank, I wanted to keep it all clean. I didn't want an obtrusive looking speedo. But all the wiring was done in period wiring, all braided lines. In here are where they all culminate into their switch blocks and terminal blocks. The switches are all aircraft, and all of these switches are period aircraft switches. So that underlying theme goes right through the bike. So all the nuts and bolts are aero standard, what they call a NAS bolt or an AM bolt. They're the standard fixings on an aircraft. And wherever I can, I've used those fixings. They just lend itself to this. I've bolted racing cars together over the last 30 years using these fixings. So they had to go into my bike that I was going to build. The gear change, I decided that it was going to have a suicide shift, as it's called, and it was quite simple in as much as the gearbox still retains a sequential pattern, i.e. down and then up, and then that in turn lends itself to this application. It's a simple back for down, forward for up. Nice and simple. Again, an underlying tone of simplicity. Something that a good friend of mine who helped me on the way with this, his world is vintage cars. He said, if you're going to make anything, whenever you go to make anything, make it in the same style and the skills that they would have had then, and it will help you build a bike that looks like it's built in the period. So any of like the frame tubes, for instance, they're all sand bent, so that tube would start as a straight tube, weld a cap on the bottom, fill it with sand, wooden block, compact it down, and then with a torch, with a flame, bend it to a template. And that's how all the bent tubes on this bike were made, through sand bending. So there's that one there, these 2 main rails, the ones down below. Any of the joints where a tube has a bolt going through it, what I've done is I've all those parts of the frame, I've made them look like cast lugs, because again, that's how it would have been made, with a cast lug that would have been brazed onto the tube. That again was a major consideration when building this bike. The brakes and the drums, as I mentioned, are BMW out of my R75, which are probably a little bit over the top for this bike, but I think they're chunky and they give a good appearance, and they work good as well. To date, this bike represents about 400 hours of my time. Quite how you would work that out as value, I don't know. I don't even stop to think about that. But one of the main questions I get asked is, how does it sound? Well, to be honest, I don't know yet. This engine would have come out of an airframe in the late 50s. I've owned it for 30 years and it never ran before that. The guy I got it from assured me. And to be fair, there are no spares for these engines. It's a very rare engine, and before I start it, I need to pull it down and check that it's okay. I know that the bottom end's good. It's absolutely, when I took the sump off and modified the sump, inside there is absolutely beautiful engineering-wise. But I need to take the top ends off just to be sure that it's all good. I can't afford for anything to be going wrong with this. So there we are, my 2018 ABCB.
So you were just saying earlier about you used to work in MotoGP.
I did.
Tell us a bit more about that.
A brief soiree in MotoGP 2004. I worked for the King, Kenny Roberts. Long live the King. And he never referred to me, and all the time I worked for him, by my name. He never ever called me by my name. He always called me Apron Guy, because I always wore an apron, and I was Apron Guy. Great guy.